One of the very first videos I uploaded on my channel was a video about me visiting American cemetery Henri Chapelle in Belgium, a World War II cemetery where a lot of American soldiers are buried. And in that video I explained that I like to visit war cemeteries to talk about the sacrifice, about the men resting there, also to honor them and to talk about them and to talk about what happened during World War I, World War II. You know, any cemetery that I visit, I like to go there and honor the men, tell their stories. And you can see all the crosses behind me. Today I'm at not an American cemetery, but a German cemetery. And it's Ysselsteyn German Cemetery here in the Netherlands. So like I said, I always like to honor the soldiers who gave their lives during any war. And that's one of the reasons I like to visit these cemeteries. And you might say, why are you honoring German soldiers? Well, we're not honoring all of them. It's fact there are a lot of bad people buried at this cemetery. We're going to visit some of their graves and we're going to talk about what they did. And if there's a bad guy buried at one of these graves, I'm going to talk about them as such. And, there are a lot of bad people buried here. There are SS soldiers here. This is actually the largest concentration of SS burials in the world. Almost 3,000 SS soldiers are buried here. And a lot of Dutch collaborators, people who were Nazi party members or the Dutch Nazi party, NSB. And people, who hunted Jews, interrogated and murdered resistance people. A lot of bad stuff, a lot of bad people that are resting here. But, in war, everything is not black or white. There's a large gray area of people who, maybe didn't want to fight in the war. Especially during the end of the war, a lot of people were forced to fight in the German army, didn't have a choice, they were conscripted. And if you didn't go, you had a problem. You went to jail, maybe they even kill you and your family would be left without an income. So yeah, you didn't have a choice but to go. And I'm going to show you a whole bunch of graves on this cemetery that's going to show us that, it's not black or white. It's not like all Germans were bad and all Germans were Nazis. Because a lot of Wehrmacht soldiers, like I said, they didn't have a choice. They were conscripted into the army, or in the Navy, or in the Luftwaffe, and didn't have a choice really. So they did the best they could. Of course, they were involved in some bad stuff, and that's war. War is bad. War is horror. They didn't really, have a choice but to get involved. And I'm going to show you that this cemetery is not necessarily 100% bad. And there are also civilians buried here, children, some of them really young. And so I hope you, at the end of this video, you get like a sense of this place and don't think, well, this is a really bad idea to go out there and celebrate German soldiers. We're not going to celebrate all of them, like I said. And when they did some bad stuff, we're going to name them as such and talk about it. While this is called German War Cemetery, not everybody resting here is German, of German birth. Of course, there are a lot of Dutch people buried here, Dutch people who collaborated with the Nazis, who were members of the Nazi party, fought with the SS, or were members of the NSB, the Dutch National Socialist Party. But there are also people buried here from Belgium, from Austria, from Russia. There are over 25 nationalities buried here on the cemetery, and a lot of them were soldiers who fought for Germany in their armies. Most soldiers that are buried here, they died during the occupation of the Netherlands, the initial fight for the occupation in May of 1940. Also, a lot of them died during the occupation, and also a large group that died during the liberation of the Netherlands that started in 1944, of course, with Operation Market Garden. And fighting continued until May of 1945. But there are also around 1,000 burials here of people who died during the Battle of the Bulge and the Battle of Hürtgen Forest. The very first grave I want to show you guys is this one. This is the grave of Johann Siegel, born February 13th, 1921. He passed away November 13th, 1944. And as you can see on the bottom of his cross, it says Plot A, Row 1, Grave 1. And this is actually the very first burial of the cemetery. He was buried here on October 15, 1944, and he was moved here from a temporary grave site at Margraten, very close by to where the American cemetery is now. And that German cemetery over there, all the bodies were exhumed that were brought here. And he was the very first one to be buried here at Ysselsteyn. Right next to the very first grave of the cemetery, on the left side of the walkway, the first thing you see basically when you enter the cemetery, you see this sarcophagus and this row of graves around it. And these are actually graves from World War I. So not World War II, like most of the burials here, but this is a small section of World War I burials. And in this World War I section there are 87 people buried, 13 of them beneath this sarcophagus. And these are all soldiers of the German army from World War I who were wounded at Liège, and they were brought to the city of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And they all died there of their wounds, and they were buried in temporary graves. And after World War II, all German dead were brought to Ysselsteyn, so they decided to bring these World War I burials here as well. So while you're watching this, you might say, wasn't the Netherlands neutral during World War I? And in fact, we were a neutral country. We didn't get involved in World War I. So you might ask yourself, why are there any World War I graves on Dutch soil then? So there are a couple of reasons for that. I explained to you about the guys resting beneath the sarcophagus. They were wounded in Belgium, in Liège, brought to Maastricht, to a hospital over there. That's where they died. And they were buried in the temporary gravesite on Dutch soil. So that's one explanation. We know of a couple of bodies that floated down the River Meuse. They were killed in Belgium, ended up in the river for some reason, floated down the river, ended up in the Netherlands, and a lot of those bodies were also recovered in Maastricht, where they were pulled from the river and buried in temporary graves. And there were also a couple of camps along the Dutch and Belgian border where soldiers were imprisoned or treated for wounds when they wandered off from the battlefield into the Netherlands. And yeah, they were treated there and they passed away from their wounds. That's why they ended up being buried on Dutch soil. And also, quite a lot of them actually, of the World War I burials, are soldiers or people who worked on ships, and they were killed when their ships were torpedoed by enemy ships. And so they all washed up along the coast in the Netherlands. That's how they wound up here in the Netherlands. And so yeah, we were neutral during World War One, but we also got some World War One burials here as well. So here we have a grave that falls into that grey area I was talking about. That not every soldier or every person on the cemetery is considered a bad guy. This is a grave of Martin Gräwe, and as you can see from the date of birth and the date of death on his cross, he was only 14 years old when he died. And Martin Gräwe worked aboard a ship, not even a warship. We worked on a cargo ship, and that cargo ship was bombed by British airplanes, and a lot of people on board that ship died, and Martin was one of them, only 14 years old. And right next to him is another guy who was also aboard that ship, Siegfried Waditzer, and he was 15 years old. So we have two guys resting side by side, 14 and 15 years old. And yeah, should we label these guys as bad? You know, I don't think so. First and foremost, because of their age, they were very young, and they didn't even work or on a warship. It was a cargo ship that they worked on, and that's how they died. The next grave I'm going to show you guys is also a grave that falls into that grey area that I was talking about, just like the previous one of Martin Gräwe. This guy buried right here. I'm standing right next to the grave. I'm going to show you in a second. And you know, he also falls into that grey area. He was a soldier of the Wehrmacht, but wasn't really considered a bad person. And I'm gonna show you his grave, and you can see that this guy is actually kind of honored by a lot of people here in the Netherlands. I'm gonna tell you his story. This is the grave of Karl-Heinz Rosch, and it's one of the most famous burials here at the cemetery because of his actions during the war. And Karl-Heinz was a soldier of the German army. He fought in the Wehrmacht. And, you know, does that make him a bad person? You know, I don't think so. He was conscripted right out of high school. He himself wanted to be a forester, but he didn't have a choice. He was conscripted into the army and had no choice in the matter. He was obligated to serve. And, you know, he went, he did his duty. And he was stationed here in the Netherlands, in Goorle, where his unit was positioned at a farm. And on October 6th, 1944, the farm came under attack from American troops that were advancing during the liberation of the Netherlands right after Operation Market Garden. And Karl-Heinz had a very good relationship with the family that lived at the farm. They still lived there while the German soldiers were there. And when the farm came under attack, all the soldiers ran outside to mend their guns. And Karl-Heinz noticed the two children of the family that were playing out in the courtyard of the farm. And like I said, he had a very good relationship with the family, and he was worried that something might happen to those kids. And so he picked them up, one under each arm, ran back towards the farmhouse where their mother was waiting in the entrance to the basement, handed over the kids. They sought shelter into the basement. After dropping off the kids, Karl-Heinz ran outside to the courtyard again to join his comrades at the gun position, and he ran over to the spot where he picked up the kids. He dropped his weapon over there, picked up his weapon, and right at that moment, that spot was hit by an American mortar. Karl-Heinz Rosch was killed. He was kind of vaporized. There was really nothing. Well, there was some left of him, but you know, it wasn't much. And you know, with this action of moving those two kids to the farm, he saved their lives, because they were playing in that exact spot where Karl-Heinz died just minutes later. And if he didn't move them, he would probably be safe. He would behind his gun, And maybe he would have died later, we would never know, but what we know for certain is that those kids would have died. Karl-Heinz Rosch was only 18 when he died. And according to a lot of people in that area, he died a hero. And that was certainly the sentiment of the family that was living at that farm and those 2 children he saved. But they kept quiet about the events that happened there because, sentiments towards the German army weren't very favorable, of course, right after the war. And Karl-Heinz was buried right by the farm. And later he was exhumed and his body was moved here to Ysselsteyn. And I think around 2005, the family came out with his story, and a lot of people were like, this guy's a hero. And a local city councillor tried to erect a statue for Karl-Heinz, but even in 2005, it was met with disapproval. A lot of people thought it was still not a very good idea to erect a statue of a German soldier. And it was commissioned in 2008. It was unveiled and it was placed on private property. The guy who lived there said, you can place it on my property because I think this guy is a hero, even though he was a German soldier. There are several high-ranking German officers buried here at Ysselsteyn, also including a number of generals. And this grave right behind me is probably the most famous general that is buried here at Ysselsteyn. This is the grave of Generalmajor Friedrich Kussin. Kussin was the commander of the German army in the Arnhem area, and therefore he was directly involved with Operation Market Garden. And when Operation Market Garden started, he learned that British paratroopers had landed near Wolfhaze, and he decided to get detailed information on the landings. And he got into his car, drove to Wolfhaze, to the headquarters of SS Hauptsturmführer Sepp Kraft, and whose unit was blocking the British forces. And when he learned all he needed to know from Kraft, Kussin decided to go back to Arnhem. He got into his car and drove back towards the city, and he was advised to take a different route because the route that he took to get there was probably overrun by British forces. But Kussin didn't listen, took the same route back to Arnhem, and that's when he ran into a group of British paratroopers, and they opened fire on the car and killed everybody inside. So the killing of a German general is newsworthy in itself, but Kussin became really famous for several photographs that were taken after he died. And there's even a video of him laying dead inside his car. And the first picture that was taken, you can see Kussin sitting inside his car. The car is riddled with bullets, and he's sitting in his car dead, also being struck by several bullets. And the second picture that is even more famous, you can see Kussin hanging from the car. Only his legs are inside the car and the rest of his body is hanging out. And it appears on that photograph that his head has been scalped. And that's the story that also went around for lots of years, that Kussin was scalped, or that they tried to scalp him. There was some research that debunked this claim that he was scalped, and it appears now that the injury that you see on the top of his head was caused by a bullet that struck him. And so you can read it on several websites, that he's been scalped, but these researchers are pretty certain that he wasn't, and that. But that's a famous story about Kussin. The next grave that we're going to look at is this one right here, and this one is a grave of Ernst Gräwe. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And this is also a grave that falls into that grey area that I was talking about. And Ernst was conscripted into the Wehrmacht in 1936 already. He served for 2 years until 1938. And in 1939, when World War II began, he was called back and he served as a medic in the Fallschirmjäger regiment. During the liberation of the Netherlands in 1944-1945, he was stationed in Deventer, and here the German army arrested several resistance members who were defending a bridge from getting destroyed by the Germans, and those resistance members were ordered to be executed after they got arrested. Something Ernst was supposed to take part in, but he refused to shoot the prisoners, and as a result he was shot himself by his commanding officer at the scene. And only a half hour after he died, Canadian forces liberated Deventer. So yeah, tragic story for this guy, Ernst Gräwe, and he died just a half hour before the town got liberated, and he got killed because he didn't want to shoot on armed prisoners, and they were eventually shot as well. And at the site in Deventer, there's a memorial erected where the names of those resistance members are placed upon, and this guy's name, Ernst Gräwe, is also on that memorial. So he is being recognized for doing a good deed in dark times. And so yeah, just a guy, a regular guy, conscripted into the army, didn't have a choice. And this could have happened to any of us if we were alive back then, if you were German. And so, I just want to make clear again, I'm not trying to exonerate every German soldier that has fought during World War II. Because it's been documented. There are some really bad guys during World War II, but there are also guys like Ernst who didn't have a choice to fight in the German army. But when he was called to do something horrible, he refused. Tried to do the good thing and to not shoot armed prisoners, and had to pay for it with his life. So the next two graves I'm going to show you are connected in a pretty special way. Besides the fact that they both served in the Luftwaffe, but those the guys that are buried here side by side are actually, both of them are princes. So we have royalty here at Ysselsteyn, and I think Ysselsteyn is unique in that regard. I've never seen the grave of a prince at a cemetery. I haven't been to every war cemetery in the world, of course, so maybe there are some cemeteries out there that have the same, but this is the first time that I've come across actual princes resting at a wartime cemetery. The first prince buried here is Egmont Prince Lippe Weissenfeld. He was born in 1918 in Salzburg in the then Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he was destined to rule the Principality of Lippe. And there was a small state in Germany at the time. But several months after he was born, Germany became a republic. And during World War II, he started out in the infantry, but soon transferred to the Luftwaffe, earning his pilot badge. And he was part of a night fighter wing, meaning he flew missions at night. He was credited with 51 nocturnal aerial victories, earning the Iron Cross first and second class, the German Cross in gold, and the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves. And during a routine flight on March 12, 1944, his plane experienced issues, and it was believed to be ice forming on the wings. And because of that, they had to fly lower to get rid of the ice, and didn't take into account that they were flying in an area with some elevation, with some mountains, and they crashed in the Ardennes Mountains near Saint-Hubert, and everybody on board was killed. The second prince is Heinrich Prinz zu Sein Wittgenstein. I hope I pronounced that right. He was born August 14, 1916 in Denmark, and that's because his father was a diplomat at the German embassy in Denmark. He also served in the Luftwaffe as a pirate after starting out in the cavalry, seeing action in the Battle of France, Germany's invasion into France, the Battle of Britain, and Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Russia. After that, he transferred to the night fighter wing, same as the other prince, and he actually is credited with 83 nocturnal aerial victories. He was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves, which was upgraded after his death to the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves and sword. He was killed on January 21st, 1944, when he and his crew came into contact with several Lancaster bombers. And they shot down 2 of the bombers, but their left wing caught fire. The reason why is contested. Some historians say by British fighter escorts or by the crew of the bombers firing on those planes. Heinrich ordered his crew to jump, and they landed safely. The prince attacked 2 other bombers with his burning plane, shooting them down. Then he tried to land, but he was unsuccessful. He crashed and he was killed on January 21st, 1944. So 2 graves side by side. They are pretty special. 2 actual princes here at Ysselsteyn. At the beginning of this video I told you guys that there are some really bad people buried at this cemetery, and that I was going to name them as such, and we're going to talk about what they did and everything to not forget what they did, to learn from it, to never make those mistakes again, to never let it happen again, and also to never forget their victims. And I'm now standing by one of the graves of a bad guy, and this is actually the grave of the very first Dutch guy who volunteered for the Waffen-SS, and his name is Willem Heubel. And this is his grave. Willem Heubel, born in the Netherlands, of course. He joined the Dutch National Socialist Party, NSB, very early on in the 1930s, later joining the Dutch SS. And after the surrender of the Netherlands in May of 1940, he joined the Waffen-SS, becoming the very first Dutch citizen to do so. And he fought on the Eastern Front, earning an Iron Cross. And after attending SS officer school, he commanded a company of the 34th SS Panzergrenadier Division Landstorm Nederland. And while fighting the Canadians on April 28, 1945, only 1 week before the liberation of the Netherlands, he was killed. So becoming the very first Dutch citizen to volunteer for the Waffen-SS gave this guy Willem Heubel some notoriety, but the reason most people here in the Netherlands know him is because he's the brother of Florentine Rosch van Tonningen, also known as the Black Widow. And Willem Heubel introduced his sister to Meinoud Rosch van Tonningen, and he was a prominent leader of the Dutch NSB. They were married, and after the war ended, Meinoud Rosch van Tonningen killed himself in prison, although his wife always said that he was murdered. And she supported him and his ideas until her own death. And she appeared on Dutch television on several occasions, and she became a symbol and inspiration for neo-Nazis until the day she died. She's a very well-known figure here in the Netherlands, and this is her brother. The previous grave that I showed you guys was of a particularly bad person. Being the first Dutch citizen to volunteer for the Waffen-SS, being a member of the NSB doesn't really make you a pleasant guy. But here we have a grave of a really bad guy. And it's strange to say, but there's even different levels in that during the war. You have bad guys and really bad guys. And this guy right here, Josef Kindel, was a really, really bad guy. He was a member of the SD, or the Sicherheitsdienst, and the intelligence agency of the German SS. And in 1943 he was transferred to the headquarters of the Sicherheitsdienst in the city of Groningen, called the Scholtenhaus. And it was also known as the House of Terror. Shortly after he was transferred there, he learned that his wife and kids were killed in an Allied bombing. And this completely changed the guy. He wasn't a pleasant guy to be around before that, but after that, that the killing of his family really sent him over the edge. And he was involved in interrogations, torture and executions of members of the Dutch resistance. And he was notorious for having his dog, a German shepherd named Astrid, attack prisoners on his command to bite them and to tear them to pieces, basically. After the war, he died in a Dutch prison of a brain hemorrhage. Yet it has been stated that he was thrown down a set of stairs by Dutch prison guards with his hands tied behind his back. And yeah, later on we're gonna hear some more stories about guys who were part of the Scholten House, the House of Terror, who also died under suspicious circumstances in prison. So I guess there was a lot of Dutch prison guards or Dutch soldiers getting even with these guys for the atrocities that they committed. So yeah, this is the grave of Josef Kindel. So the next grave I'm going to show you guys is from a guy that can be connected to, I think, the most famous person of World War II, of one of the most famous people of World War II, especially here in the Netherlands. She wasn't born in the Netherlands, she was born in Germany, but she was living here in the Netherlands during World War II. And I think everybody watching this video knows her name. And her name is, of course, Anne Frank. And the grave that I'm sitting next to right now is a guy who can be directly linked to her. And the guy that I was talking about is this guy right here. This is Julius Dettmann. And he was a member of the Sicherheidsdienst and attached to the Gestapo in Amsterdam. And in that role, he was responsible for finding Jews that were in hiding. And on August 4th, 1944, he received a phone call saying that there were Jews hiding in a house at number 263 Prinsengracht in Amsterdam. And he immediately sent a squad to that address. And at that address, 8 people were arrested who were hiding in that house. And yeah, like I said, one of them was Anne Frank. Also, her parents and her sister were arrested. And the Frank family and the 4 others were sent to Westerbork transit camp here in the Netherlands. And from there to various labor camps or concentration camps. Anne Frank died at concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. And her sister also died there. Their mother died in Auschwitz. Their father, Otto Frank, he survived the war. And Julius Dettmann, who is his grave we have right here, was arrested when the war ended and he was detained. And he committed suicide by hanging himself in his cell. So yeah, this guy is basically responsible for the arrest of Anne Frank. There's been a lot of research done to the phone call that he got. Who was that? Who was the person who betrayed the Frank family? And we still don't know until this day. There are some options that have been investigated, but yeah, we never know for sure. And I think this guy, Julius Dettmann, took the identity of the caller to his grave. So we probably will never know who betrayed Anne Frank and her family. And yeah, so this is the guy that is responsible for their arrest. This grave right here is a special one, not because this guy was notorious or he was a really bad guy or anything. In fact, we don't even know a whole lot about him. This is the grave of Franz Deuscher. Once again, I hope I pronounced it right. If not, I'm sorry. And a couple of years after the cemetery was first established in 1946, the decision was made to make a parking lot for people who were visiting to park their cars. And during the construction of that parking lot, it's the same parking lot that I just parked my car in. During the construction of that, the grave of Franz Deuscher was discovered. He was buried in a field grave, and his grave was lost right after the war, so nobody knew he was buried there. And it's because of the construction of the parking lot that he was discovered. And yeah, he was exhumed, of course, and transferred inside the cemetery and buried here in 1950. So yeah, pretty special story connected to this grave. You know, if they didn't construct that parking lot or maybe in a different area, he would still be lost and he would still be buried out there. And you know, in time, I always think, you know, how many of them are still out there. You know, it's reasonable to assume that more of them are buried outside of the walls of this cemetery, maybe. But yeah, luckily this guy, Franz Deuscher, he was discovered, transferred inside the cemetery to rest with the rest of his countrymen. This is another interesting grave, especially interesting for German people who might be watching this video. And this is the grave of Heinrich Kramm. And he was the father of German Schlager singer Heino. I know probably people from America, the United Kingdom probably have no idea who that guy is, but in Germany is pretty well known, pretty famous, Heino. And this is his father. And details of his death are really vague. Couldn't find anything about him besides an article saying that he was killed by another German soldier in dispute over a woman. I have no idea if that is really the case, because that's only one article that I found about it. But yeah, that's what they say in that article, that he was killed by one of his own over a woman. So yeah, dying in war is tragic, but getting killed by one of your own over a woman, that's extra tragic. So at the beginning of this video, I said there are a lot of bad guys buried on this cemetery, and a lot of people, soldiers, who fall into the gray area of the war. But I'm now standing at a grave that can be classified as, you know, not even falling into that gray area. The people that are buried here at this grave are considered to be, you know, innocent in all accounts. And that is the grave of a mother and a 6-year-old daughter buried together here at Ysselsteyn. And that grave is that of Bertha Nussdorfer and that of her daughter Maria Nussdorfer. On October 5th, 1942, a large group of British bombers took off to bomb the city of Aachen in Germany. And weather conditions hindered the work of the British pathfinders who were supposed to mark the target. And by mistake, they targeted the Dutch city of Geleen. And that city was bombed heavily. 83 people were killed in that bombing, including Bertha and Maria. And so yeah, these people are not war criminals, they're not Nazis, they're not SS soldiers, just two innocent people, a mother and a daughter living their lives in occupied Netherlands, and died by bombing, by mistake, by Allied bombings. So yeah, this is another good example as why this cemetery is not a bad place, that not only bad people are buried here. So yeah, pretty tragic. Mother and a 6-year-old daughter buried here. And I'd like to say, for all the people watching that think that Ysselsteyn German Cemetery is a bad place, you know, this proves it. You know, this is not just a bad place. This is a place where a lot of bad people are buried. A lot of people are buried, therefore, in the gray area that I was talking about, you know, who fought in the army, killed people. But we also have innocent civilians buried here. And these two are the evidence of that. And the next grave I'm going to show you is maybe even more tragic. And this is that grave. This is the grave of Josef Meijer, born February 20th, 1945, and he died February 21st, 1945, so only 1 day old. Yeah, another example of an innocent life here on this so-called bad cemetery. And we know of Josef Meijer. He was born at Kamp Vught. There was a former German camp here in the Netherlands, and after the war, after the liberation in October of 1944, the Allies used the camp to lock up war criminals, Dutch Nazi sympathizers, but also to house German families that were driven out of their homes by the advance of the Allied armies and the fighting that occurred because of that in Germany. And living conditions in the camp were not good, and a lot of children died. And tuberculosis, that was a cause of death for a lot of children. And I couldn't find what killed baby Joseph here, but fact remains that he died 1 day old. So Ysselsteyn is a place of big contrasts. We just saw the graves of the mother and daughter were buried in the same grave together. We have the grave of the one-day-old baby, and a couple rows from them is the grave of a guy who can be considered a really bad guy. And they are really buried close together. And so, yeah, the contrast is pretty high. Innocent civilians. A couple rows down, we have a really bad guy. And this is the grave of a guy who was also a member of the Sicherheitsdienst, the SD, and his name is Ernst Knorr. So this is the grave of Ernst Knorr. And earlier in this video I talked about Josef Kindel, who worked for the SD in the Scholtenhuis in Groningen, the House of Terror. And Ernst Knorr also worked there, also part of the SD, like I said. And he was, before being stationed in Groningen, he was stationed in The Hague and kind of wreaked havoc there. You know, he was really brutal. And his superiors wanted to get rid of him because he was considered too extreme. And you know, that's always something that's really striking to me. Imagine being too extreme by Nazi standards. That means you have to be really, really extreme, a really bad guy. And, you know, I'm going to tell you what he did. So, yeah, that kind of proves that he was. So he was transferred to the Scholtenhuis after they got rid of him in The Hague. And in the Scholtenhuis he continued his reign of terror. And he was responsible for interrogating people. And he liked to beat them with his rubber baton that he always had with him. And what he also liked to do is he liked to insert that baton into the rectum of the prisoners and yeah, cause severe internal injuries. And a lot of them died because of it. And he's also responsible for the death of many resistance members in the Netherlands. And when the war was over for Germany, or they were losing the war, Knorr and other members of the Scholtenhuis, and the guy next to him, Arthur Thomson, was also a member of the Scholtenhuis. They fled, and but luckily they were arrested and locked up. But yeah, like Josef Kindel, Ernst Knorr and Arthur Thomson, they didn't live long enough to stand trial. They died under suspicious circumstances, suicide, or maybe these war criminals were killed by angry men seeking revenge. We'll probably never know, but yeah, I don't think a lot of people care how they died, as long as they did, because they always say you don't wish death on anybody, but you know, this guy, Ernst Knorr, was a really bad guy. On every war cemetery you visit, American, British, World War I, World War II, doesn't really matter, you will always find brothers resting together, side by side, or on the same cemetery. It's also the case here at Ysselsteyn. There are not many brothers buried here together, only 5 sets of brothers. And here we have the grave of one of those sets of brothers. This is the grave of Willibald and the Roman Kehl. And older brother Willibald, who's on the left-hand side, died in October of 1944. No day is known of him when he died. And his younger brother died a month later. And Willibald was buried here in 1949. Roman followed a couple of years later. And Roman was supposed to be buried in a different section because this section was already full. But on request of their parents, Roman was buried in the same grave as his older brother. And yeah, you can see on the bottom of the grave, they have the same grave number. So yeah, they are buried together in this grave, and their crosses are also much closer together compared to the rest of the crosses. So this video about Ysselsteyn, you can label it as original content. It cannot be connected to any movie or TV show. That's one of the things I like to do on this channel. Take movies or TV shows about historic events and explore history that way. But there's actually one grave here, maybe a couple of more, but only one that I know about that is actually connected to a movie. And that movie is The Longest Day. And the guy next that's buried here can be connected to that movie. I'm going to tell you a story right now. And this is that grave. This is the grave of Heinz Wodarczyk. I hope I pronounced it right. He was a pilot with the Luftwaffe. And during D-Day, the Allies made sure they had air superiority over France, so that the troops and all the equipment could land on the beaches without having to worry about enemy planes attacking them. And almost no planes attacked the soldiers on the beaches, but there were a few. And one of those planes was piloted by this guy, Heinz Wodarczyk. And together with famous pilot Joseph Pips Priller, Heinz made a strafing run across Sword and Juno Beach, emptying their guns on the soldiers that were entering the beach. And they did so under heavy fire from the naval fleet in front of the beaches. But both planes made it safely back to their headquarters. And their attack, their strafing runs, was featured in The Longest Day. And 6 months later, Heinz was killed when he was shot down by a friendly flak fire over the Netherlands. So yeah, this is a grave that can be directly linked to a movie, The Longest Day. Earlier we visited the grave of Josef Meijer, a one-day-old baby who died in Kamp Vught. And here we have the grave of another baby, Anthonius Simons, and he wasn't even a day old. He also was born in Kamp Vught, and as you can see from the dates on his cross, he died the same day as he was born, April 3rd, 1945. And from the reports that I found, he was stillborn, and I couldn't find out why his mother was in the camp. But like I said earlier, war criminals, Dutch Nazi sympathizers were locked up in the camp, but also to house German families who were displaced from their homes. And but yeah, his name sounds Dutch, so I think his mom was in the camp for sympathizing with the Germans, or maybe his father was a German soldier. We never know. It's all speculation. What we do know is that his young life was cut short, and whoever his father was or what his mother might have done, Antonius Simons was an innocent baby, and certainly not the bad guy that rests here on this cemetery, according to a lot of people. This was a baby that was stillborn, not even got to live for a whole day. This is one of the last graves I'm going to show you, not the last one, but one of the last ones. And this is the grave of Anton van Dijk, a Dutch collaborator who was very sympathetic to the Nazi party. He joined the NSB, the Dutch National Socialist Movement, very early on, and he also became a member of the SS. He worked in Nijmegen, where he was appointed the commander of the police force. And in that capacity, he had to deal with resistance members. But he was also an avid Jew hunter and was responsible for the arrest and deportation of around 500 Jews. And he was so vicious and horrible in his ways that he was expelled from the NSB. And he was always first in line to steal the gold and other belongings belonging to the Jewish people he arrested and deported. And in 1943, the resistance had enough of his wicked ways, and they decided to assassinate him. On July 8th, 1943, he was shot by a resistance member named Henk Romein. And Van Dijk was heavily wounded and died 2 months later from his injuries. And Henk Romein tried to get away on a bicycle after the assassination, but he was stopped by someone who thought he had stolen that bike. He was arrested, taken to Kamp Vught, and shot 9 months later. So I've now come to the last grave that I'm going to show you in this video. There are almost 32,000 graves, so I could make a video hours long here, but yeah, we have to wrap it up sometime. And I thought it was maybe a good idea to not end with a really bad person who did a lot of horrible stuff. So the last grave I'm going to show you guys is a little bit different. Not because he's a well-known guy or he's a baby or anything, but by the appearance of his grave and how it looks. So yeah, we're going to show it right now and have a look at it and tell you something about it. So this is a grave that I was talking about. This is the grave of Josef Stuchlik, Obergefreiter, that's his rank, and his date of birth, date of death. And yeah, you can clearly see this is different from all the others. And this is, I think, the only grave on this cemetery that has one of these plaques on it. And he was initially buried as an unknown soldier. And if you remove that marble plaque, you can still see it on his cross. It says an unknown German soldier. But somebody placed this plaque on it. Maybe his family did. He was identified probably at some point. And normally they would replace his cross with his name and place a new cross with his name on it and his date of birth and all other stuff. Well, for some reason it didn't happen. Maybe it took too long and the family was like, we're going to do it ourselves. And maybe they had this plaque made, placed it on his grave so that he had a name and he would be resting beneath an unknown cross. So yeah, that's a little bit of a different grave here at Ysselsteyn. And like I said, I've never seen another grave on this cemetery like this. So yeah, that leads me to believe that this was not an official plaque, and maybe his family did this. That was the last grave I was going to show you. It's time to wrap up this video. Like I said earlier, you can make probably a video hours and hours long here. Yeah, 32,000 people, almost 32,000 people are resting here. So yeah, you could make a really long video, but it's time to wrap it up. I hope you did this video. And more importantly, I hope you get a sense of this place, what it's like. You really get a sense of what I said in the beginning, that it's not as black and white as I said. War is not black and white. It's not just good guys and bad guys. Even among these so-called bad guys, there are good people. And maybe good people who were forced to do horrible things, but also innocent people like civilians, babies. They also have the last resting place here at Ysselsteyn. So I'd like to say to all those people watching that might oppose the cemetery, do your research, and you will find out that it's not that black and white. And I hope this video contributes to that, and that everybody watching this gets a sense of this place and what it's like. And if you're ever in the area, please visit this cemetery yourself. It's a really impressive place. So for now, time to wrap up this video, like I said, and I hope you enjoyed it once again. And if you did, maybe you can consider subscribing to the channel. Really help me out a lot. Like, subscribe, comment, and all those things will grow the channel and will put me in a position to make more videos like this. And so yeah, thanks for watching for now, and see you on the next one. Bye bye.